My name is Kathy, and I am 52 years old, currently working as a nurse in a senior care facility. I got married when I was 23, and at 24 I gave birth to my only daughter, Lucy. I met my husband in high school through mutual friends, and our bond grew at a class reunion, eventually leading to us dating. We decided to tie the knot after we both graduated from college. Though we married young, it was something both of us wanted, so things went fairly smoothly. However, when Lucy was in high school, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and since it was already in its late stages, he passed away quickly. Back then, both Lucy and I were consumed by grief, but now after a few years, we've each continued on with our lives. Lucy got married last year to a man named Jake, and they're currently living as newlyweds in an apartment not too far from my place. Because they're nearby, Lucy occasionally drops by so I don't feel too lonely. Jake works at a major company and is quite successful. Though Lucy wasn't too keen on it, she quit her job and seems to be living comfortably staying at home. Whenever Lucy visits, she's usually all smiles, but lately she seems a bit down. She appears as if she wants to tell me something, but often just sighs without saying anything. Seeing her like this, I once thought of asking her about it, but if she seems hesitant to speak up, there must be a reason, so I didn't pry. However, that phase didn't last long, and as their second wedding anniversary was approaching, she finally opened up.
Mom, can we talk?
She looked serious, so I turned off the TV and faced her, ready to listen. I had been waiting for this moment. Eager to know what was bothering her, I gave her my full attention.
Did Dad ever cheat?
Cheating? I frowned, finding the word distasteful as memories of my husband came back. He wasn't the type to chase after women and had always showered Lucy and me with love, so the thought never crossed my mind. I don't think he ever did.
Hearing that, Lucy let out a big sigh and murmured, "I thought so."
You're talking about Jake, aren't you? I had a hunch this was about Jake since Lucy brought up the topic. When I first met Jake through Lucy's introduction, I never got such a vibe from him. He had a kind smile, was polite, and looked at Lucy with such adoration. I genuinely felt relieved, thinking he'd cherish my daughter. So hearing the word cheating from Lucy's lips took me by surprise.
Well, it's not confirmed yet.
That's how she started, and what she shared was shocking. Apparently, my daughter had fallen ill a few months ago and had a fever. She called Jake about it. It was late in the evening, but she had been told by Jake earlier that he would be out late to a business dinner. In her distress, she reached out to Jake, but a woman answered. Moreover, the woman seemed to recognize her as Jake's wife, and chatted her up cheerfully. The woman didn't mention anything about an affair, but soon handed the phone to Jake. Jake only mentioned he was with a business associate. Feeling unwell, my daughter didn't press for there and simply asked him to come home, but he dismissed her, saying it was just a cold, and hung up. When he came home, it was already morning, and she could smell soap on him. Listening to her, I wanted to tell her that it was clear something was going on, but seeing her distraught face made me hold back. More than that, the fact that Jake would leave his sick wife for another woman made me furious.
You can't leave your sick wife for a business dinner. If that's an affair, it's even more unforgivable. Why didn't you call me?
Because, Mom, you said you were on standby that day. I didn't want to bother you.
True, she mentioned that day I was on standby and was actually at work that night. But this was different. Thankfully, she's better now, but she could have faced serious risks like dehydration or pneumonia. I let out a deep sigh.
There's something else.
Looking a bit scared, she continued. It was about her premenstrual syndrome, or PMS. My daughter suffers from severe PMS and regularly visits the gynecologist to get prescription meds. If she doesn't take them, she becomes bedridden with fatigue, headaches, and cramps a week before her period. Jake knew about this since they started dating. But after marriage, he became stricter, telling her to stop being so dependent and do the housework since it's not a real illness. Fortunately, the medication helps and completely alleviates her symptoms. Fortunately, the medication helps but doesn't completely alleviate her symptoms. She loves Jake, so she tried hard to endure this treatment. But now, she couldn't hold back her tears.
Why not just leave him? I won't object.
I said, handing her a tissue, but she shook her head.
If I wanted a divorce, I'd be ruining his reputation. He provides for me, and yet I don't appreciate him. He won't give me his signature for a divorce, he says.
So use his affair as evidence. She again shook her head.
There's no proof. I tried checking his phone, but it's locked and there's nothing in his pockets. If she tried to divorce him on grounds of adultery, she'd need proof. Without evidence, it wouldn't be easy.
I was at a loss. I wanted to help my daughter right now, but felt helpless. There must be something we can do.
I'm okay. Talking to Mom made me feel a bit better. I'll try harder to gain Jake's approval.
Noticing my concern, my daughter wiped her tears and smiled at me. That smile tugged at my heartstrings. We ended the conversation there, but I couldn't shake off my worry for her. Thoughts like, what if something happens? What if she has a bruise on her face next time? Filled my mind with anxiety. Sadly, my fears were realized a few months later. It was a rainy day, and I happened to have the day off from work. Just as I finished my chores and was about to watch TV, the phone rang. The call was from Lucy.
Hello, what's up?
I thought she might be asking if she could come over, but all I heard was heavy breathing.
Lucy, are you okay?
Sensing that something was seriously wrong, I immediately grabbed my car keys. Then a faint voice whispered, "Mom, help me." Suddenly, there was a loud noise, and she didn't respond to my calls anymore. I wanted to rush to Lucy's apartment, but it was an hour's drive away. Thinking that could be too late, I immediately dialed 911 and sent an ambulance to her apartment. I had the building manager's number, so I called them too, asking them to open her door as soon as the paramedics arrived. Though I initially planned to go to Lucy's place, I thought the hospital would be quicker, so I headed to the general hospital instead. It was probably where the ambulance would take her. About 14 minutes into the drive, I received a call from an unknown number. I pulled into a nearby convenience store to answer it. It was indeed someone from the hospital, informing me that Lucy had been brought in. I told them I was on my way and hung up to continue my drive. I reached the hospital in another 30 minutes and hurried to the reception desk, where they quickly directed me to where Lucy was. As much as I felt like collapsing, I power walked to her room. She had been examined in the outpatient internal medicine department and was now lying in bed with an IV in her arm. Relieved to see her resting peacefully, I sat down and caught my breath. A nurse soon fetched a doctor who explained that Lucy had severe stress-induced gastritis, with some bleeding spots detected during an endoscopy. They advised me to create a less stressful environment for her. The doctor said she must have been in tremendous pain. I wanted to hold Lucy's hand and blame her for not confiding in me, but I knew it wasn't her fault. I quickly pulled out my phone and called Jake. Despite his friendly tone, I had to fight back the urge to yell at him.
My daughter collapsed, saying she had stomach pains.
It was a day off, so Jake should have been at home. Yet she called me, which probably means Jake left her suffering with stomach pain to go out. I heard Jake's slightly mocking voice. Without waiting for my response, he hung up. Overwhelmed by anger, I wanted to throw my phone, but I was at the hospital, and breaking my phone out of frustration seemed foolish, so I resisted. After taking a deep breath to calm down, I went back to Lucy. After some time, she slowly opened her eyes.
Lucy, are you awake? How do you feel?
She slowly turned her gaze towards me. Seeing me, she whispered, "I'm okay. Why didn't you say something sooner?" "You're too stubborn," I said. The moment I saw her faint smile, a wave of relief washed over me and I started to cry. As I wiped my tears, Lucy shed some of her own.
I'm sorry for worrying you, she said.
We both laughed. After her IV treatment, Lucy was allowed to go home. I wanted to take her to my place, but she insisted on going to her own home. I decided to go with her. We bought some clothes and went to Lucy and Jake's house. The inside was a mess, like a burglary had taken place. Lucy said, trying to pick up things.
Rest, I'll handle it.
I insisted and made her go to the bedroom. Among the scattered items were broken dishes, a toppled shelf, and upturned plants. A picture frame, probably holding a wedding photo of Lucy and Jake, was broken beyond repair. As I cleaned up, I found divorce papers with Lucy's name on it, and various photos and documents. Seeing this, everything clicked. Lucy probably hired a private investigator to gather evidence of Jake's infidelity. She must have confronted Jake, leading to a violent confrontation. Lucy must have been terrified. From what I can see, it doesn't look like he physically hurt her, but this is becoming a situation we can't ignore as parents. Thinking this, I immediately called Jake's parents. That evening, Lucy came out looking a lot better and smiling, so I spread out the things on the table to confirm the situation.
This is the reason.
Her eyes widened at what I showed her, but then she gave a wry smile and nodded. Indeed, what she told me confirmed my suspicions.
This is not just your problem anymore. Let's get both sets of parents involved.
No, it's okay. I'll hire a lawyer or something.
What are you talking about? You even hired a detective. That wasn't cheap. We don't have enough money to also get a lawyer. It'll be faster if we talk to Jake ourselves.
I spoke sternly and Lucy said nothing more. The next morning arrived and Jake didn't come home. While I was tidying up, the doorbell rang. I went to answer, not wanting Lucy to encounter Jake, if it was him, and found Jake's parents standing there with apologetic faces. As soon as they saw me, Jake's dad Mark bowed deeply and his mom Linda followed suit.
We're so sorry. Our stupid son has done terrible things to Lucy.
I quickly invited them in, worried the neighbors might hear.
I'm not looking for an apology now. Let's discuss what we're gonna do next.
At that, Mark looked at me seriously.
Leave Jake to us.
I trusted his words and let them in, filling them in on everything. Linda cried and apologized to Lucy repeatedly, holding her hand. Mark clenched his fists in anger at the photos. Just then Lucy's phone buzzed. She hesitated to answer, so I took her phone and saw that it was Jake. I pressed the call button. Jake spoke without even hearing my voice. The words from Jake weren't out of concern for Lucy, but rather sounded scripted.
Working late? Well, Lucy passed away.
I spoke calmly, catching Jake off guard. Not only Jake, but Lucy and Jake's parents looked shocked by my words. What do you mean,
I mean, just what I said. Come home right now.
I hung up after that.
Mom, why the lie?
I handed the phone back to Lucy, who took it with a wry smile. I stared at Lucy, trying to hide my frustration. You have to say at least that much. You can't deny that it could have turned out that way. At those words, Mark nodded in agreement.
That's right. Everything Jake's done up to now, and especially this time, he should take responsibility for.
He needs to feel the weight of it, even if just for a short while. At that, the daughter chuckled and called it an exaggeration. But to me, it doesn't feel exaggerated at all. Just as Mark said, Jake should feel some responsibility.
Listen, when Jake comes home, we'll talk with him first. You stay in another room.
I initially said this, hoping the daughter would feel the weight of her absence. She seemed resigned, maybe thinking there was no convincing us, and agreed. After waiting for several minutes, the front door opened and a flustered Jake crushed in. His previously neat suit was now disheveled, and his normally well-groomed hair was a mess. As he noticed us seated around the table, he frantically scanned the room.
Before that, sit down here.
Mark sternly insisted, pointing to a spot in front of us. Though out of breath, Jake obeyed and sat down where told. Where's Lucy?
What were you doing all this time?
Mark interjected before Jake could say much more. At this, Jake faltered and looked directly at Mark.
In the rain yesterday was pouring, you know. Hell.
Inda swiftly retorted. Indeed, even if it was a picnic, it was heavily raining yesterday. No one would have won in such weather.
Why didn't you tell your boss right away when you heard about your wife?
Is your boss that heartless? If so, I'll have a word with him. Call him now, Mark pressed. Jake's lie was clearly seen through. He seemed to be racking his brain. But Linda and Mark kept cutting off his words and getting to the core.
What were you really doing yesterday?
Linda's eyes were filled with tears as she choked on her words.
In the rain yesterday was pouring, you know how. Inda swiftly retorted. Indeed, even if it was a picnic, it was heavily raining yesterday. No one would have won in such weather.
Why did you tell your boss right away when you heard about your wife?
Is your boss that heartless? If so, I'll have a word with him. Call him now, Mark pressed. Jake's lie was clearly seen through. He seemed to be racking his brain, but Linda and Mark kept cutting off his words and getting to the core.
What were you really doing yesterday?
Linda's eyes were filled with tears as she choked on her words.
So you left her alone while you casually spent time with another woman?
I I scattered photos in front of Jake, photos that I had received from my daughter.
I was shocked when I got home. The house was a mess, everything was broken or damaged.
And this was on the table. You didn't leave her alone in a fit of spite because she mentioned divorce, did you? That's a serious crime, you know? Jake glanced at the scattered photos, his face turning even paler. He closed his mouth, unable to say anything. After a heavy silence, Jake let out a big sigh and showed an unexpectedly indifferent expression. No wonder I didn't believe her when she was actually in pain. You know the story of the boy who cried wolf? Well, in Lucy's case, the girl who cried wolf. We were dumbfounded at Jake's audacity. I was beyond surprised that he would go so far in saying this. I felt a strong surge of anger at Jake's callousness. My clenched fists were ready to swing, but I knew I wouldn't stand a chance. I wished my husband were here to help. That's when Mark stood up with force and grabbed Jake by his collar, his face flushed red, and raised his fist. Jake closed his eyes, seemingly prepared for the punch. Just when we thought it was too late to stop him, the living room door opened. We all looked over to see my daughter Lucy, standing there in tears. Jake's face once again turned pale as he couldn't believe Lucy was alive. Lucy silently approached Jake and placed her cell phone in front of him. The screen displayed a recording. Lucy promptly hit the play button, and the audio of Jake's earlier callous remarks filled the room.
I recorded it, so you can't wiggle your way out of this one.
Lucy retrieved her phone, her hands shaking, and glared at Jake. Jake's forehead was drenched in what appeared to be cold sweat. Despite his desperate pleas, neither of us was moved. Neither was Lucy, who kept a stoic expression. Jake was restrained by Mark and taken away to his parents' house. With Jake gone, Lucy finally broke down and sat, letting out a sigh of relief.
Are you okay? You did well.
As I spoke, Lucy began to wail loudly. I thought this nightmare was finally over. But the struggle was far from done. We decided to sell the condo, and Lucy moved back with me. Unfortunately, she still suffered frequent stomach aches due to stress. Each time, the pain was so severe that I had to take her to the hospital. The cause of that stress? Jake again. Even though he was under his parents' watch and couldn't visit, he bombarded Lucy with messages, some apologetic, some threatening. Thankfully, we found a good lawyer and initiated divorce proceedings, but progress was slow as Lucy would get sick on days she had to meet Jake.
It's okay, let's take it slow.
I would always reassure my daughter, who was in a rush to get divorced. Despite my words, her anxiety did not subside, and she seemed to be under a lot of mental stress. Her condition worsened to the point of insomnia, and she began visiting a psychiatrist, barely getting by day. The attorney wondered if there was a way to proceed without meeting. But we had to meet at least a few times, and I agreed to accompany her during those meetings. Despite evidence of infidelity, it took over 2 years from the time we all discussed the matter until the divorce was finalized. Thankfully, the divorce went through, and we were able to claim alimony. Peace came to my daughter, but it seems that recovering her mental health fully will take time. I've left my current job and now work at a clinic so that I can be by her side during nights, ensuring she feels safe. As for Jake, rumors about his treatment of my daughter and his affairs spread at his workplace, creating a very uncomfortable atmosphere. At first, Jake seemed determined to stick with his job, but his relentless behavior led his colleagues, especially some women, to use sneaky tactics to mentally pressure him into resigning voluntarily. Seems like Jake learned the hard way how frightening it can be to make enemies out of women. When he resigned, it was also the time when the divorce was finalized and the alimony was determined. He drained his savings, and it wasn't enough, so he turned to his parents for help. However, his parents, refusing to support Jake any further, said they would let him stay in their house, but wouldn't lend him any money. They told him to fend for himself, even with meals. Because of this, Jake had no choice but to go into debt. Now, he's scraping by with odd jobs, but most say he can't keep it up for long. If he keeps this up, he'll face bankruptcy and won't be able to pay the alimony. His parents have asked for understanding. For my part, seeing what my daughter has gone through fills me with anger. But there's nothing more to demand. Moreover, my daughter is gradually recovering, her smile is coming back, and she's even using a day service to reintegrate into society. Not wanting any further trouble with Jake, I accepted his parents' terms on the condition that he never contacts us again. It will take time, but I believe my daughter will recover. After all, she seems to be getting along quite well with the guy she works with at the day service.